everyone, welcome to week 2, well the end of week 2 of this course. We're going into week 3 of this course. This is Professor Benjamin. I hope everything is going well for you. I wanted to, so this is week 2 roundup, and as we head into week 3 I kind of just want to do some housekeeping items. As usual, I start off with those housekeeping items and then I'll take a look back on the content last week and a brief look at the content that we have coming up this week. So just for the housekeeping items, I've noticed again that more than 7 people are answering each question. I know some of you are going in there at late to answer the questions, and so you try and pick the easiest question, the one that you don't have to spend the most time researching. And it's obvious when students do that. There are questions, and I can tell there are some questions that are really easy to answer and some questions that take some more thought to answer those. And so it's your job, if you want to get in there early, to answer the easier questions, then to get in there earlier in the week than to wait till Tuesday night or Wednesday night to answer those questions. I see that a lot of people are waiting till the last minute and then they pick the easy questions and you're going over the 6-person limit. Unfortunately, this week I'm going to have to start giving people zeros for answering those questions. The other thing that I took off points this week, and next week you'll get a 0 because I've given now ample notice. I've never had trouble with this after the first week in past semesters, so and I've been doing this for over 8 years, so there should be no reason that this is an issue. It's one of the main issues is because students aren't getting in early enough to answer the questions. Number 2 is that you need to put the question at the top of your answer. So before you start writing your answer, you need to have the question at the top. This way students know that that question is out of play. That is right in the directions for initial posts. The third thing is, please refrain from using I statements in initial posts in this class unless the question specifically asks, what do you think? If the question does not ask that, then you should not use I statements. I statements add a personal feel to the question and they take the factual basis out of it. This is a non-lab science class, so we're trying to take the personnel out of the questions and make it more factually and scientific based. So we need to remove any I statements from initial posts. You can use I statements in response posts, but not in initial posts, okay? So there are a couple of the housekeeping items that I wanted to go through. Week 2, we covered Tragedy of Commons by Garrett Hardin. We talked about the idea that William Foster Lloyd in the 1800s wrote this article about population explosion, and he used the sheep scenario as an example, and he talked about that inherent need for greed. So we look for our short-term gain in the commons, which is the shared space, rather than thinking about the long-term interests of society. And he gave the example, he said that we can solve this whole problem by privatization. Because back then, privatization in the 1800s, privatization was probably the best answer because you would pass on that piece of land from generation to generation, and you would think about the long-term interests of your family and future generations. Unfortunately, in today's time and age, that's different. It's a different world we live in. In the 1960s, Hardin wrote an article. That article, which was right here, talked about the issues with privatization and what happens if we privatize a commons. Guess what? Then it becomes not a commons anymore. What if we give people a lottery or we charge people to use the commons? Well, then maybe it could become a social justice issue because some people can afford to go to the commons, some people can't. So there's lots of issues. He also talks about a bunch of other technical solutions. He talks about mutual corrosion, which is ticketing or fining, and he talks about the problems with that as well as what the usefulness of it, because it actually does work to an extent. He talks about the welfare state and how it works to an extent. But he always says there's something missing, and that is that there's no moral component to technical solutions, and that we need some moral component to technical solutions in order for them to work. He talks about education. He talks about guilt, that maybe guilt is that moral culpability that we need. So he talks about all these things in this article. So it's a fantastic article. Then we talked about invasive species. Invasive species are only tragedy of the commons. I'm going to repeat that again. Are only tragedy of the commons when they are brought in for a human short-term gain. If in nature a bird carries a seed from one place to another and transports it, and an invasive species takes over an area, that is not considered a tragedy of the commons invasive species. Tragedy of the commons invasive species are when a human brings something in for a short-term gain and doesn't think about the long-term interests of society. And there were tons of examples. A lot of you gave fantastic examples. I thought that was great. So a lot of you did some research and answered the questions really, really well. Some of you are struggling with your writing, and unfortunately in online classes, the only way we can communicate is mostly through writing. So if you struggle with writing, then you need to make sure you write your initial posts early, take them to the writing lab, have someone proofread them. These are supposed to be like mini papers each week, in-text citations, MLA formatting. It just makes it more formal. Remember, again, this is a non-lab science class, so you're not taking a lab along with this class, so we need to make sure this class is scientifically sound as best as we possibly can. And one of the ways we can do that is to make sure that we have answers with factual basis to them. Okay, so that was session 2. Now we're going to move into session 3, which is a big session. We cover a lot in this session. We cover ethics, economics, and policy. This is chapter 2 of the textbook. We talk about pricing the price list, which is cost-benefit analysis, and how we make these CBAs, these cost-benefit analysis, when we implement new policies. So when we, like for example, they give you the example of the arsenic policy. And when we implement these policies, we do this cost-benefit analysis. When we do cost-benefit analysis, we cannot save every life. So when we implement a policy, we'll say, well, how much will it take to how much will the cost be on corporations and on companies and on tightening water standards, and how much will that go on to the homeowner and all of this. We do all this cost-benefit analysis to see what is the most, how strict can we make the rule to make it the best for the most people, so the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. But there's a problem with utilitarianism, which is the fact that it's the greatest good for the greatest amount of people at the best price. The issue with that is that what's considered the greatest good? Is the greatest good the fact that, 1 million people die in another country because they're going to save the lives of 2 million other people? Yeah, in terms of utilitarianism, that's the case. And so we need to really think about that word utilitarianism, and when we think about cost-benefit analysis, and is that the best way to do business? There are a lot of flaws with how we do cost-benefit analysis, especially what the price people are willing to pay. So we actually send out a survey, and we ask people what are they willing to pay for clean air. And of course, people put this astronomical amount, but then what they actually will pay when you show up at their door is something completely different. So that is a huge problem. Also, depending upon, for example, how much are you willing to pay to save the bald eagle? Some people, if they maybe say they were in the military and that's a symbol of their freedom, right? Or a symbol of their troop or whatever, that they may be willing to spend more than someone who's does not have an emotional connection to the bald eagle. So it's really hard to get a pure value. And in your text, they talk about that, the hedonic value, the ecological value, etc. So you'll look at that. Cost-benefit also talks about solutions, and one of those solutions is cap and trade. And here are 2 really good articles about cap and trade, actually 4 articles about cap and trade in terms of how it works, whether it doesn't work. So I think it gives you a good hint as what cap and trade is, and some background information on it. Also in the chapter, we're going to cover some stuff on environmental injustice. And I talk about case studies from Chester, PA, and from Camp Lejeune, and issues with how we take advantage of people. And most of the time it used to be because of race. So we used to take environmental injustice used to mostly be along racial lines. But now environmental injustice occurs a lot because of lack of education and lack of income. So lack of education in the of the people in that area and lack of income of the people in the area. Lack of income means they might be working more than one job, so they can't go out to the public meetings and fight for whatever they need to fight for. Lack of education means maybe they don't understand the political process of what needs to happen before they can take it, before they can fight a corporation coming into their neighborhood. So there's a lot involved with that. We'll talk about one environmental injustice issue going on in the United States today when we talk about fracking later on this semester, so that's important. So there's a lot we're going to cover this week. And it's going to just require that you read a lot and that you understand the material. Remember, a lot of this stuff piggybacks off of each other. You can use multiple articles in one answer. So really spend some time reading the articles and formulating an answer to best give us information and factual basis to a side that you choose when answering the question. Overall, I'm happy with how the semester's going. We always have some hiccups in the beginning of the semester, but as you start to get used to the pattern and your other workload that you have this semester, you start to fall into a pattern. So I'm happy with what we're doing this semester. Remember a couple of those housekeeping items, and I look forward to all of your submittals this week. As usual, reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. Have a fantastic week, and I look forward to your answers this week.